I absolutely love the Olympics, and one of my favorite bits of the show every single time is the opening ceremony. These things are always the most memorable part of the games, whether it's over-the-top displays of your nation's glory, accidentally incinerating a bunch of doves in the Olympic flame, or airbrushing the fact that you're about to annex part of your next-door neighbor. Paris 2024 might go down as one of the most iconic opening ceremonies of recent times. If it does, that will be due to the fact it was about 17 hours long and was absolute chaos from start to finish. And I loved it. Given that I started this channel to talk about the Eurovision Song Contest, I don't feel like it's that much of a jump to talk about the Olympics as well. They're both competitions between countries, the only difference being that in the Olympics, we see that through the lens of skateboards, steeplechases, and horse dancing, instead of through a series of musical fever dreams. I'm going to try and go through some of the most deranged moments of this opening ceremony, both good and bad, and try to make sense of it. I'm going to try and point out what I thought went well and what I thought went badly, because there was plenty of both. Before I get into this extremely French fever dream, make sure to like this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel. You can follow me and my editor Jay on Twitter. If you want, you can follow me on Instagram too. If you want to get videos a day early, you can subscribe on Patreon or here on YouTube. You can also join us over on Discord as well. All the links you need are in the description. Without further ado, let's get into the ceremony, and let's start with the first big problem, which, to be fair, wasn't the fault of the organizers. It was absolutely bucketing it down with rain, like absolutely hammering. This didn't halt the proceedings, but it meant that everyone and everything was completely soaked. Personally, I felt sorry for the designers of the uniforms for each team for this section, because while lots of teams did still brave the rain, a lot of people simply had their work obscured because everyone chose to wear rain ponchos instead. Imagine all the work, the blood, the sweat, the tears in painstakingly putting together these incredible uniforms for your country, only for no one to see them because the whole thing gets rained out. This is actually a real shame because everyone needs to see Mongolia's uniforms, which go so hard. Like, this is ridiculous. It also didn't help that none of the seating installed along the river in Paris had any kind of covering whatsoever. The other problem was that a series of coordinated arson attacks affected the major high-speed rail lines running out of Paris on the day of the event. They could have just styled it out if they'd gotten the taxi drivers to burn some tires on some motorways and then got the air traffic controllers to go on strike. Then it would have been a truly authentic French experience, and a display of French culture every bit as valid as what we actually saw in the ceremony. With all of this in mind, we bravely soldiered on. Once we got through the opening montage featuring Zinedine Zidane and a bunch of kids breaking the #1 rule, which is never ever get into a stranger's car, or boat in this case, we were underway and straight into the flag parade. Previously, this had been done as its own section of the ceremony, all in one go, but the difference this year is that we weren't in an athletic stadium. That meant that instead, the French had chosen to intersperse it with different performances. We'll get onto some of those performances in a minute. Much like the rest of the ceremony, we were kind of relying on the weather to sell the flag parade to us here, and because we didn't get the weather, it kind of made it a bit shit. At the very least, it had less of an impact, and I also felt really sorry for the smaller delegations who ended up on these tiny, pathetic little boats, while other small countries got to share with their neighbors and got a much better boat as a result. Like, look at this piddly little thing that poor Suriname had to deal with, while just behind them, Tajikistan, Taiwan, Tanzania, and Chad got to share this much more impressive vessel. I also wasn't a fan of the fact that you couldn't really see the flag bearers as well as in previous ceremonies. If your team is marching through a stadium, you can have the flag bearer at the front, they're foregrounded, it's really clear who they are. If they're one amongst a crowd on a boat, in a lot of delegations, especially the big ones, it can be difficult to tell who the flag bearers actually are unless the commentators tell you. This was compounded later into the parade by the absolute inability of the camera crews to remember to wipe their lenses. That meant all of the shots became a messy blur. This is a theme that we'll revisit in a minute. As for the different performances, there were some good, some bad, and some completely baffling. We'll go through some of the ones that really stuck out to me. I will say that some of this is probably because there is only a certain proportion of it that we, as non-French spectators, are going to understand. There are certain cultural references, certain bits of humor that we just won't get. If I think about this from a British perspective, there were probably a lot of people around the world who either didn't know what the NHS was, or if they did know what it was, they didn't know why we were celebrating it in an opening ceremony. For reference, it's the National Health Service. It's free. We're very proud of it. Anyway, let's start with the good, or at least sort of good. Lady Gaga was always going to be a safe bet when it came to the performance, and props to her for coming across really, really convincingly, given that French isn't her first language. At the same time, That's kind of a problem. Lady Gaga is not French, and this is your opening act to the world. The first thing that you see is not a French artist. It's Lady Gaga. This was kind of disappointing to me because France has one of the strongest music industries, one of the strongest show business industries in the world. To give a slot to a major foreign artist, you naturally take one away from a French artist, or at least a francophone artist. Luckily, this wasn't a theme through the whole show, but I do just think it was maybe an opportunity missed. Not long after that, we had the best part of the ceremony, or at the very least, one of the best. Whoever's idea it was to strap the metal band Gojira to the side of a building, pair them with an opera singer, and visuals of Marie Antoinette's disembodied head deserves a massive pay rise. The red streamers, the pyro, the giant ship, everything about this was amazing. It was also a bit of a weird full circle moment for me to see a band that I'd previously heard of because of Guitar Hero show up in an Olympic opening ceremony. Moving swiftly on, allow me to be a boomer for a moment. The Minions skit. It was funny. I enjoyed it. No, I will not apologize. It was stupid, it was silly, I get it. It's annoying because it's the Minions, but it made me smile, okay? In all seriousness, I think there's actually something really sweet about adding something with as much universality as the Minions to a ceremony like this. If you're a 6 or a 7-year-old watching this at home, this is the thing you're gonna remember. I know you could apply the same argument to Lady Gaga, I guess, that she's so universally recognizable and that's why they might want to include her in the show, but I think it's different when it's something that you're clearly trying to add in order to appeal to a specific audience that otherwise might not feel catered to. What was slightly bizarre is in the maximum possible whiplash, we followed this with a rendition of the French national anthem, sung by an opera singer atop the Grand Palais. Now, if this isn't a stunning visual, then I don't know what is. To be honest, I have no jokes to make about this because this just goes so hard. No comments, good job, France. Let's move on. Fast forward and we get to some of the more controversial parts of the show. There was controversy over this performance because apparently it's referencing the Last Supper and it's mocking it. Firstly, this is the Dionysian feast, not the Last Supper, because the Olympics is, you know, Greek. Secondly, I think it's really funny that the people who are getting mad about this are Christian right-wingers. If anyone should be familiar with the fact that the Last Supper is one of the most imitated and pastiched images of all time, it's the Christian right, because you see it all the time. Might it be, and this is just a wild suggestion, but bear with me here, that they don't actually have a problem with people imitating the Last Supper, and their main problem is that it was a bit gay? The thing is, right, if you're worried about the Olympics turning your kids gay, you have much bigger things to worry about than the opening ceremony. We are currently in the middle of a wall-to-wall showcase of the most physically fit people on Earth. If your child is going to have an awakening, I'm pretty sure it is happening right now, and it wasn't caused by a scantily clad blue man in the opening ceremony. In any case, that came in the middle of one of the best bits of the show anyway, which unsurprisingly for me as a Eurovision fan was the EU tribute / Eurodance section. If you're gonna hit me with Freed from Desire and Darude Sandstorm and Midnight City back to back to back, you're gonna have a winner for me, and I loved it. Unfortunately, it wasn't all good, and there are some things I have to complain about, and we're gonna start right here in this same act to see one of them. It was so infuriating how for large parts of this event, it seemed to be completely forgotten that this is a made-for-TV broadcast. I get that there are 300,000, maybe 400,000 people there watching it live, but there's a billion people watching it on TV, and for large parts of the ceremony, it felt like we were just watching a live event without any kind of consideration for how we would view it. What we got was barely visible athletes because no one had bothered to wipe the camera lens, and a complete lack of understanding of what a Steadicam is. There were so many close-up shots in various performances, like this one in that Eurodance section I just talked about, where the cameras were bobbing all over the place. When you're filming fast-moving dances like this, it makes the whole thing so much less effective. And it's frustrating because it's such an easy thing to fix. The other thing that didn't help with these problems is that it was so up and down, even within individual performances. You had this great shot of a ballet dancer on the rooftops, followed by this terrible shot of dancers from a distance. They're way too small in the shot, and the background totally washes out their movements. It just feels like it hadn't quite been thought through. Speaking of things that hadn't been thought through, whose idea was it to have Imagine by John Lennon being sung on a fake island in the middle of the river while a camera continually pans around in circles and makes everyone feel travel sick? I know the events of May 10th in the Eurovision Press Centre have traumatized Eurovision fans for this song in particular, and I apologize for my part in that. But Gal Gadot and friends already did a pretty solid job on this back in 2020. I can get completely behind the sentiment of doing a call for peace during the opening ceremony, but it gets completely lost behind the fact that this song is mind-numbingly stereotypical. What's more, whoever set up this camera, yes, once again, it's completely covered in water, so we can't even see it properly. This was actually the second last act of this section of the show, followed only by a dramatic sequence featuring a horse riding down the river. While the visual of someone on horseback riding down the river to deliver the Olympic flag was pretty cool, they did undermine it a little bit when they then hung the flag upside down. It did give me a good laugh watching the cameras desperately try to film literally anything else during the Olympic anthem than the flag once they realized, and this was only compounded by an emergency alarm going off in the middle of it. Luckily, things got better from there, and to be honest, this little stretch at the end, although it took a lot of work to get to, given we were on hour, 12 by this point, this section of the ceremony, set at the foot of the Eiffel Tower, basically made us forget about all the problems we'd had up to that point. There were plenty of good bits too, but it was so much chaos that my head was spinning a little. This focused me right back again. The final acts were set in an arena at the base of the Eiffel Tower, which made for a pretty stunning setting. Before I talk about those acts, we should quickly mention the real hero of the piece here, which is this woman holding an umbrella. She stood there while the president of the Paris Olympic Committee gave a speech for 8 minutes, not moving a muscle. She did not even twitch. Her arm must have been burning alive, and I really hope if there are some spare medals at the end of the games that they give one to her, because God knows she deserves it. Anyway, once those formalities were done, and once Zinedine Zidane and Rafael Nadal faffed about with the Olympic torch for a minute, we were on to the finale. First, we had a laser show on the Eiffel Tower. I genuinely think that this produced some of the most stunning imagery that we've ever seen at an Olympics opening ceremony. The rings on the tower, combined with the lighthouse style beam at the top, is a visual that I don't think I'm going to forget for a really long time. It wasn't completely free of surreal moments, given that it was interspersed with shots of a very confused looking Rafael Nadal, Serena Williams, Carl Lewis, and Nadia Comaneci being sped down a boat on the River Seine with the Olympic torch while Serena tried not to throw up, but it didn't detract from the fact that this was really incredible. Then we had the lighting of the Olympic flame, and I found this a really moving process as well. You had a whole load of French sporting legends here passing the torch from one to the next. This included the oldest living French Olympic champion who participated in the games in 1948. Then, when the flame was lit, it rose into the air as part of a hot air balloon. This was a tribute to the first ever manned hot air balloon flight, which took place in 1783, and I found it really powerful. Well, all of that was pretty touching though. Nothing could prepare me for the emotional train that was about to hit when Celine Dion appeared atop the Eiffel Tower. It's been well documented that Celine Dion suffers with stiff person syndrome. This disease cannot be cured. It progresses over time, and it causes your muscles to become extremely stiff and to spasm. For Celine Dion in particular, while she was diagnosed in 2022, she recalls having symptoms for years before that. The disease by that point had impacted her health and her well-being to a point that she was no longer able to tour, and she had to cancel her remaining tour dates. It's not just the physical symptoms that we should talk about here either. It's hard enough to live without the ability to walk properly or to speak or to sing in a normal way, as well as constantly losing your balance and falling. The mental impact of this is massive as well. Diseases like this rob you of your confidence. They make you feel like you can't look after yourself and that you can't trust your body. It's important to think about how that would translate to performance anxiety, even for someone as experienced as Celine Dion when going onto a stage like that. Imagine being in that situation where everything you worked for is being taken away from you by a disease like that, only to find a way to build yourself back up, stand out there like she did, and sound absolutely incredible. The Olympic ceremony serves as the opening of 2 weeks of a showcase of the pinnacle of human sporting achievement. I know it's a cliche, but every single athlete going to these games and going to the Paralympic Games that follow has gone to unbelievable lengths and had to overcome so many obstacles to make it to this point. There is nothing that could be more fitting than bearing witness to Celine Dion's moment of triumph here, to pay tribute to that. I found myself in floods of tears by the end of this performance, and to be honest, I suspect I wasn't the only one. Maybe I'm getting a bit carried away, but for me, this was one of the great opening ceremony moments, not just of this year, but of any year. I struggle to think of any moment more triumphant, more emotional, more fitting than this one. As a finale to the ceremony, it was absolutely perfect. Don't get me wrong, this thing was a mess in a lot of ways. It was confused, it was chaotic, and often it was completely bizarre and unintelligible. But the thing is, it succeeded in the only two ways that truly matter. Firstly, it still created the magic that you start feeling during the Olympics opening ceremony. I was worried that not having the show in a stadium could take some of that away, but I didn't find that at all. Secondly, it was the most French thing you could possibly imagine, and to be honest, the chaos was part of that. If nothing else, it was the most faithful and the most endearing portrayal of France that I've ever seen. These things are meant to be camp. They're kind of meant to be a little bit ridiculous. And to be honest, I don't think it's as fun if you take it too seriously. For that reason, in that sense, this was dead on the money, and the French should be very, very proud of themselves. This video was a bit out of the box for me, so please do let me know if you want me to do more non-Eurovision related content in the future, because it's definitely something I'm interested in pursuing. That said, you can also tell me if this was a horrible mistake that we should forget about and never repeat. If you're new here and not a Eurovision fan, the best way to encourage me to make more non-Eurovision videos is to comment under this one, like it, and subscribe to the channel. In any case, for now, thank you so much for watching. I really enjoyed putting this together, and it made a really nice change from me from the usual Eurovision content. Thank you so much, and I'll see you soon.